The door wasn't even shut behind me when I heard the bolts slide into place. A neat, metallic sound. I stood on the porch, holding a bag of frozen peas in one hand and a receipt from the pharmacy in the other. The lights inside flicked off one by room, like someone dimming me out on purpose. At first I thought it was a mistake. I tried the handle, then again, nothing. The porch light didn't come on. I stood there for a while, I think. I don't remember how long. The neighbor's sprinklers hissed across the lawn next door, catching the last of the sunlight. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once. Then again, the wind shifted and blew mulch and rosemary around my ankles. I knocked, not loud, just enough footsteps, then silence. A shadow behind the curtain. It was her voice muffled on the other side. You said you'd only be gone an hour. We already told you. You can't keep doing this. Doing what? I hadn't gone. To the movies? I wasn't at a bar. I was picking up magnesium for her migraines and peas for my knees. This is our house now, okay? She said, I bought that house in 1988. I have the check stubs in a folder. I was the one who painted the cabinets blue after my husband died. Who paid for the new roof when the hail cracked the shingles? Who planted the orange tree out back and buried 2 cats beneath it? But it didn't matter. Not to them. The key was gone from under the fake rock. My phone was dead. The peas had started to melt. I set them on the railing and sat down on the top step. There was a hairline crack in the wood that hadn't been there last summer. I waited a little longer. Not because I thought they'd changed their minds. I just couldn't stand up yet. My body doesn't do abrupt anymore. Cars passed. One of them slowed, then sped up when they saw I wasn't young, wasn't in trouble, just old and sitting still. That kind of sitting makes people uncomfortable. I stood. Walked to the end of the drive. I didn't look back. There was a motel a few blocks over, next to the dry cleaner and the sandwich shop that still uses wax paper. I knew it because I used to drive past it on the way to pick up my grandson from school. Room 8 had a porch light that flickered like it was winking. I paid in cash. The man didn't ask questions, just handed me the key and pointed. There was a buzzing in my right ear. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off my shoes. The carpet was rough and the air smelled like bleach and dust, but it was mine for the night. I stared at the little desk near the window. There was a pen, a pad of motel stationery, and a Gideon Bible in the drawer. I touched the spine and shut the drawer. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there with my hands in my lap and thought about the sound of that bolt sliding shut. It was final. Not loud, not cruel, but final. They didn't need to yell at me. They'd already made their choice. I remembered the last thing I said to her before I left for the store. I told her I'd be back in an hour and asked if she wanted chamomile tea for later. She was scrolling on her phone, didn't look up. Yeah, whatever. I used to braid her hair before school. She had this fine, wheat-colored hair that wouldn't hold unless I sprayed it and pinned it and whispered a little good luck into it. I'd do one French braid down her back, and she'd sit on the toilet lid swinging her feet while I worked. Now, she shuts off the lights and slides the bolt and calls it boundaries. I don't know how it got like this. I just know it did. The room was quiet. The bedspread was scratchy and patterned with squares. I laid down without turning off the light. Let it glow above me, humming. They didn't say get out. I didn't scream or curse. It was colder than that. Colder and more organized. Like they'd been waiting for a moment I didn't see. Coming like they had a plan and I was just the final piece they needed to remove. I paid for that house. Every tile, every pipe, every termite inspection. I paid for it with double shifts and cracked hands and nights I ate cereal so they could have hot lunch at school. I paid for it when no one helped me shovel the snow and when I fell on the porch steps and got up alone. But now they call it theirs. I didn't say anything that night, not even to myself. Breathed and stared at the ceiling until the light, blurred and the buzzing in my ear, faded into the sound of the fridge rattling in the corner. The next morning, walked to the diner across the street and bought a coffee with coins I had in my coat pocket. The girl behind the counter called me ma'am and gave me a real mug instead of a paper one. I sat by the window and watched the cars go by. People going somewhere. People being expected. No one knew I'd slept in a motel. No one asked. That was the first time I realized they could lock me out and no one would notice. Not the neighbors, not the mailman, not the friends I used to have before I became background noise. They were probably in the kitchen that morning, laughing, eating the yogurt I bought. I pictured the empty hook where my keys used to hang. I sipped the coffee slowly, even though it had gone lukewarm. That house had my name on it. Still did. And they had no idea what I kept in the black folder at the bottom of my suitcase. I wasn't always like this. Quiet, watchful, careful with how I step and where I place my trust. There was a time I spoke loud enough to fill a kitchen. My voice could call across the yard and pull children in from the trees. I used to be the center of things, not the afterthought. We bought that house when my husband was still alive. The year the twins started first grade. It was a fixer-upper, the kind with sunken steps and a cracked chimney, but the yard was big and the schools were good. He said we'd grow into it. Okay. He didn't. He died 3 winters later. A bad heart, they told me, like it was a quirk. Like it hadn't left me with bills I couldn't lift and 2 small girls who woke up in the middle of the night calling for someone who'd never answer again. I worked nights at the hospital then, housekeeping, scrubbing floors while doctors nodded past me like I was part of the wall. I took in mending and babysat other people's children during the day, stretched the hours until they tore a little, then patched them with coffee and silence. But I made it work. I got them to school. I made birthday cakes from box mix and added real lemon zest to make them feel fancy. I kept the light on in the hall and never once missed a parent-teacher meeting. Even when I had to change in the parking lot, the house became the third parent. It held us. It caught the winter wind and made it sound like music in the walls. It smelled like cinnamon and mop water and crayons. I fixed the porch myself with a borrowed drill and a bent screwdriver. I learned how to seal windows with plastic and hope. I changed the water heater after watching for YouTube videos and calling a man named Carl who walked me through it while eating his lunch. When my girls were older, things got easier for a while. We could afford a car that didn't groan going uphill. We went out once a month for pancakes. I started reading library books again, slowly. Like I was remembering how to breathe for pleasure. Then my oldest got pregnant. 19. The boy left. Of course. Said he wasn't ready, as if anyone ever is. I moved her and the baby into the house. I gave up the sewing room. She cried in the bathroom with the tap running, and I made tea she never drank. I held the baby when he wouldn't sleep, and taught her how to swaddle him snug like he was back in the womb. I walked him for hours up and down the hall until my hips screamed. When she started dating again, I didn't say much. Wanted her to feel free. Wanted her to build something better for herself. I told her this was still her home. I told her love would come back around. It did, in a way. She married a man who liked to fix things that weren't broken. The kind who smiles with his mouth, not his eyes. The kind who says, ma'am, and then moves your things when you're not looking. I didn't trust him, but I stayed polite. Stayed out of the way. I gave them the master bedroom. Told myself it was fine, that it was temporary. I'd still be needed. Over time, I'd WASN single quotes. She stopped asking for help. Or maybe she started believing she didn't need it. Or maybe he convinced her that leaning on me was weakness. I'll never know the exact moment I turned from mother into inconvenience, but I felt it. Like when you close the door and realize the air pressure's changed. A hush where there used to be rhythm. He started taking over bills. Said he was streamlining things. I let him. It's one less thing for me to worry about, I told myself. I was tired, and it felt nice not to do the math every month. I still cooked, still folded their laundry when they forgot it in the dryer, still made sure the medicine cabinet had what they needed. But something shifted. I could feel it in the way they talked around me. In the way my grandson started calling me by my first name sometimes, like I was a guest. I told myself it didn't matter. That names are just sounds. But I heard it. I heard everything. There were new curtains in the living room I didn't choose. My chair moved to the far corner. My casserole dish went missing. He said he thought it was old and tossed it. I bought that dish with grocery store stamps in 1992. The final straw, if I'm being honest, wasn't even a moment. It was a sound. I heard them whispering late one night. I was up folding towels. I stopped when I heard my name. Just a murmur, followed by a laugh that didn't sound like my daughter's used to. She's not going to live forever, you know? The way he said it, like I was a sofa with a frayed arm they were already planning to replace. And she didn't argue. Just sighed. She's tired, that's all. I folded the last towel with shaking hands. That was the moment I realized they weren't waiting for me to leave. They were planning how to make me stay gone. It wasn't hate. It was erasure. I started keeping a folder then, printed things out, quietly, the deed, the tax records. The power of attorney she'd asked me to sign, and I hadn't. I tucked it all. In the bottom of my suitcase, under sweaters that smelled like eucalyptus and old dreams. I didn't stop talking to them. I didn't make a fuss. But I watched. I waited. The mail started coming to their names. My birthday passed with a card that said, "Love you," with no handwriting inside. My chair vanished altogether. And then came that day with the bolt, the tease, the porch, and the lock that clicked with finality. They thought I was out. That I'd fade, but I had the folder. And I had my name still written in ink on something they forgot to check. I found the file by accident. Or maybe I was meant to. It was on the shared family laptop, the one they used for recipes and school forms and shopping. I had sat down just to look up a chicken marinade. But a notification popped up in the corner of the screen. A cloud sync, or something like that. I don't pretend to know how it all works. I only clicked once. There it was. A document titled quitclaim_final_signed.pdf, dated 6 months back, my name on it, or rather a version of my name. Typed, not signed. A digital scrawl where my real signature should have been. I opened it and the words didn't make sense at first. I read them 3 times before the shape of the truth landed. It was a transfer, a property release. My name releasing claim to the house. My house. My name giving it over to them. They'd forged it cleanly. Like I'd never mattered. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just stared at the screen, letting the weight of it settle like wet wool. I knew then what they'd done. And why they'd been so polite, so tight-lipped, so overly helpful these past months. They've taken it from me, slipped it from under my feet like a rug I'd stitched together over decades. While I was making tea and folding clothes and humming lullabies to their son, they were redrafting my life behind my back. I closed the document and sat very still. There was a mirror above the kitchen table. I saw myself in it, not a victim. Not yet a fighter, just a woman who had finally been told the full story. Whether she was ready or not, that night I couldn't sleep. I laid in my bed, my old sewing room, now cramped and dark-handed, listened to them laughing in the kitchen. He made cocktails sometimes. She used to ask me if I wanted one. Lately, she didn't ask. I kept hearing the sound of the forged signature. In my head, that little stroke of the pen that wasn't mine. That said, I had agreed to disappear. I went back to the computer the next morning. I found emails. One thread between them and some lawyer I'd never heard of who seemed very cheerful about the whole arrangement. Casual, friendly. The way someone sounds when they're paid well and don't care who gets hurt. There were texts, too. I shouldn't have looked, maybe, but I did. "We need her out before summer," he'd written. "She's dragging her feet. Still thinks it's hers. Don't worry, she won't fight." She never does. That one sat like iron in my chest. I never do. I made dinner that night, chicken, green beans, rice. Set it out like always. Said nothing. They ate quickly, made polite small talk, and left their plates half full. I washed the dishes alone. Dried my hands carefully. Went to my room and opened the black folder in the bottom of the suitcase. Deed in my name, mortgage history, bank transfers, receipts from every repair I'd paid for. The notarized letter from 1999 where my husband had written in shaky ink that the house should never leave my hands. They had the signature, but I had the proof. I made copies, lots of them, put some in my coat pocket, others in the lining of my purse. I left one in a library book I planned to return just in case. I didn't confront them. It's not how I was raised. I was taught to gather, to observe, to move only when ready. They were counting on silence. They were counting on the version of me who apologized when bumped into, who said thank you even when handed less than she deserved. But that version had started to crack the day I heard her say I was tired. That's all. Like I was a rug unraveling under their feet. I watched them more closely after that. The way they avoided eye contact. The way their laughter shrank when I walked into a room. He checked the mail before I could. She started putting her phone face down on the counter once. I heard her say to a friend on the phone, she's still here. I don't know what she's waiting for. I wasn't waiting. At the library, I used their printer. Printed screenshots, gathered timelines. Found a real lawyer, not the one they used. A quiet woman with a tired voice who read every line I showed her and said, "Slowly, this won't hold." I asked her not to contact them. Not yet. I wasn't ready. She said I had the right, that the signature was easily disprovable, that the law still recognized original ownership. That fraud wasn't just a word on television. It felt strange. Hearing that word, fraud, as if I'd been robbed by strangers, not raised them myself. I walked out of her office into the sunlight and stood on the sidewalk for a long time, holding my purse tightly. I could go home. I could open the door and pretend to be surprised later. I didn't. I walked to the bus stop instead, took the long way back, let the wind blow at my collar like it had something to say. They had built a whole life on the assumption that I wouldn't notice, or maybe that I'd notice and forgive. But I had noticed, and I hadn't forgiven. Not because of the house, not even because of the signature, but because they didn't think I was worth the truth. They didn't come to me. They didn't ask. They just rewrote my name, as if I were already gone. And that, not the document, not the emails, that was the betrayal. I used to believe that enduring meant loving. That if I kept giving, kept showing up, kept making things easier for everyone, it would prove something. That one day they'd turn to me and say, "We see what you've done. We didn't forget." But all it proved was that I could disappear without protest. There's a kind of grief that doesn't come with funerals or casseroles. No one brings flowers when your child becomes a stranger. When the person you raised stops seeing you as a mother and starts seeing you as an obstacle. The night I decided to leave, it was raining. Just enough to draw lines down the window. I was watching the neighbor's porch light flicker through the blinds. The house was quiet. My grandson was at a friend's, and the two of them were in their room, door closed, television humming through the wall. I sat in the dark with a spiral notebook open on my lap. No plan, just a list. Small things. My medication, my identification, the spare keys, the folder dot. There were other things I wanted to take. The cedar jewelry box from my mother, the quilt with the faded red stitching, but I knew I couldn't carry much, and if I lingered, I might talk myself out of it. I'd always thought leaving would look dramatic. Suitcases flung open, shouting, doors slamming, but it was quieter than that. Almost reverent. I stood up, picked out a sweater, folded the papers into the zippered pouch in the lining of my bag, packed toothpaste, 2 changes of clothes, the pill organizer. When I moved through the hallway, I didn't even breathe loud in the living room. The painting I'd bought from a street artist in San Francisco hung slightly crooked. I adjusted it without thinking, still doing what I always did, making things look right even as I walked away from them. I paused at the kitchen door. It was all there. The countertop I had refinished by hand. The spice rack I'd built from scratch. The jar of flour I kept topped off because my grandson liked pancakes on. Sunday mornings, they would use all of it without a second thought. Call it theirs. I didn't take any food. I didn't want their things in my bag. I didn't want their crumbs in my coat pocket. Outside, the rain had stopped. Just the smell of wet grass and distant streetlights reflecting in puddles. I walked to the corner, turned back once. The house was still, the porch light off, like always now. I took a cab to the motel, the same one. Room 8. The man at the desk didn't ask why I was back. Just handed me the key and slid the receipt across like we were two old friends in on a quiet secret. I set my bag on the chair, sat on the bed, waited not for them. For the noise inside me to settle. It didn't, not at first. My thoughts spun. What if they noticed I was gone and tried to call? What if they didn't? What if they celebrated, but the phone stayed silent? No missed calls, no messages. Just one notification from the pharmacy reminding me it was time to refill the prescription. I used to pick up for her. I started writing. Letters I never sent. One to my husband. One to the version of myself who used to make excuses for everyone else's cruelty. One to my daughter, short, tight-lipped, not even angry. Just a list of what I remembered and what I would no longer forget. At the lawyer's office the next morning, I handed over the folder. She flipped through it while I watched her eyes narrow with recognition. "They'll fight it," she said. I nodded. "But you have every right," she added. "They don't own that house." "You do?" I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded again and asked her to proceed. There was a relief in it, but not the kind that made you light. It was a relief that pressed down, heavy, like a blanket in winter. One you pull up to your chin when the world feels sharp. I didn't tell anyone where I'd gone. I changed my number, opened a new account at a different bank. One where my name wasn't just a secondary. I signed documents with slow, careful strokes, spelling each letter as if reclaiming it one syllable at a time. The motel room became familiar. It's the way the faucet dripped if you didn't turn it all the way. The hum of the fridge at night. Way the sun cut a perfect rectangle across. The carpet at 10 a.m. There was a diner down the street that served oatmeal with brown sugar and raisins. The waitress learned my name by the third visit. She asked if I wanted the corner booth or the window seat. I always chose the corner. I read the newspaper every morning. Not to see the world, but to remind myself I still existed in it. I wrote in the notebook. Lists, thoughts, moments I wanted to hold on to. I wrote my name on the first page, big in black ink. I had spent so many years signing permission slips, checks, emergency contact forms, always for someone else. Always with the understanding that I was temporary supporting invisible dot now. It's time I signed my own name on something that mattered. It was like stitching myself back together. They hadn't just tried to take my house. They had tried to take my place in the world, quietly, with paperwork and politeness and justifications. But I hadn't vanished. I had stepped out of view long enough to remember who I was without their gaze. I didn't hate them. Not exactly. I just didn't belong to them anymore. And they didn't know that yet. I didn't need to slam a door or write a dramatic note. I just needed to stop making everything so easy for them. The thing about being quiet all your life is that people don't. Notice when you fall silent. They mistake it for more of the same. The lawyer filed the papers 3 days after I handed her the folder. It was clean, swift, not even contested at first. She said they'd be notified by certified mail and that if they wanted to fight it, they'd have to come forward with proof. There was none. The house had never left my name. The quitclaim they'd uploaded and pretended was signed. It was never notarized. And the ink didn't match any of my previous legal documents. One search of the county records showed what they hadn't bothered to check. That I was still the legal owner. I sat in room 8, reading the official statement over a cup of motel coffee. Property title, reaffirmed in favor of original owner. The phrasing made me smile in a way I hadn't in months. Small, quiet, not smug. just ... true. I didn't go back. Let the paperwork go first. My lawyer mailed them notice. Didn't need an introduction, just facts. Legal terms, they wouldn't understand unless they sat down and read slowly. I doubted they would. I changed the locks 2 days later. I waited until I was sure they'd gone to work. I had memorized their schedules the same way a gardener knows the seasons. I took a cab up the street, walked the rest of the way. The house looked the same from the outside, ordinary, suburban, full of lies. The porch was bare. The flower pots I used to tend had dried out. No one watered them. They'd moved the mailbox, left a cardboard box out for packages. Little signs of a life that assumed permanence. I unlocked the front door with a spare key I had made years ago and walked in. It wasn't mine anymore. Not in the way it had been. The air had changed. Smelled like burnt coffee and scented candles that didn't suit the wood tones. Still, my feet knew where to go. The living room was cluttered. Toys, mail, a throw blanket I didn't recognize. I moved through it like a stranger, not touching, just noticing. In the kitchen, the spice rack was still on the wall. A few of the jars had been emptied. No one had refilled them. The labels were curling at the edges. I opened the drawer where I used to keep the measuring cups. Empty, that part. Stung, I didn't linger. The locksmith met me exactly at noon. A young man with a kind face who asked for my ID, checked it, and nodded without a word. He had the locks changed in less than an hour. By the time they got home, the keys in their pockets wouldn't fit the doors. I left the envelope on the counter, not in anger, not in cruelty. It's just a copy of the legal decision and a printed note from the lawyer's office that said any further communication should go through her. My number wasn't included. The new keys stayed with me. I left quietly, the same way I'd come in. Out the back door, past the orange tree that no longer bore fruit. I brushed my hand against the bark and kept walking. That night, I didn't return to the motel. I stayed in a small room above a florist's shop downtown. A friend of the lawyer's had offered it temporarily. Smelled like eucalyptus and fresh-cut stems. And the window overlooked a row of flickering streetlights. I laid in bed and listened. To the quiet, real quiet. The kind that doesn't hold resentment or unspoken blame. The kind that lets you breathe all the way in. I thought about how they'd react. If they'd shout, cry, call me names. They'd pretend they didn't care. If he'd throw something, she'd crumble. But none of that mattered anymore. It wasn't mine to hold. They'd learn in time what I already knew. Silence can be a weapon, but it can also be a shield. I had been their shield for so long now. I was my own. I bought a new phone with a new number. No photos, no contacts, no memories attached. I opened a checking account at the small credit union on the corner. The teller smiled when she asked for my signature, and I wrote it slowly, deliberately across the line. Full name, every letter. No abbreviation, she complimented. My handwriting. I almost cried. That week, I rented a small storage unit and moved the few things I had left my folders. My clothes, the quilt I'd managed to bring. I began to catalog what was mine, not by memory, but by possession. What I'd taken back, what I'd kept. What they hadn't stolen. Control, it turned out, wasn't loud. It wasn't revenge. It was paperwork. It was presence. It was waking. Up every day and deciding who you are without asking for permission. They sent an email a few days. Late, the tone was frantic, accusatory. We thought you were gone. We didn't know you'd do something like this. Okay. You're blowing everything out of proportion. There was no apology, only confusion. And that same edge they always used when they were scared but didn't want to admit it. I didn't reply. The lawyer did. Briefly. The house belongs to my client. Any attempt to re-enter will be considered trespassing. Please do not contact her further. It was the first time in years anyone had stood between me and harm. I printed the email and folded it into my notebook. Just a little piece of proof. Not for court. For me to remind myself that this time I didn't back down. I didn't explain. I didn't ask to be seen. I simply took back what was mine and walked away. They didn't come to the florist's shop. I'd half expected them to, though I wasn't sure what I would have done if they had. But they didn't. They didn't know where to find me. And I didn't leave BREADCRUMBS. Instead, they came apart online. It started small. A vague post on my daughter's social media, something about betrayal and people not being who you think they are. A photo of her hand gripping a coffee mug, the caption blurry with indignation. No names, just implication, but it spread quickly. That's how those things go. Friends chimed in with sympathy. Words like devastated and unimaginable got tossed. Around some of them were people I used to know. Church friends, school moms. They typed their concern in public, then clicked away and forgot. Then came his post, longer, more pointed. He talked about elderly confusion, about how some people just can't accept change, how things had been transferred legally, appropriately. And now someone, he never said my name, had caused unnecessary disruption. He called it elder drama. That phrase stayed with me. Not rage, not sorrow. Drama like my life was a subplot. In a series he was starring in, they didn't know I could see it. I had no photos on my new profile, no familiar name, just a quiet account used for watching. My lawyer had suggested it in case anything useful showed up. It did. Screenshots. Threads a friend of theirs offered to start a GoFundMe to help them rebuild. That one made me laugh, though it came out low and flat, like air escaping a tire. He said they were blindsided. They weren't. They were arrogant enough to believe I wouldn't notice. Or if I did, I'd be too old or too soft or too attached. To stand up, I wasn't any of those things anymore. I stayed in that little room above the florist's for another week. The woman who owned the shop was named Marla. She brought me a bouquet of leftover tulips one morning and left them on the chair outside the door. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "You remind me of my aunt," and gave me a soft smile. One evening, I helped her sweep up the fallen petals from the floor of the shop. The air smelled like lavender and faintly of glue from the price tags. She told me her favorite flowers were zinnias because they never apologized for being bold. I told her I liked hydrangeas. They bloom soft, but their roots hold deep. After that, she started calling me Hydrangea Lady. It made me laugh, real and sudden. The lawyer called that same day. She said they'd left a voicemail, my daughter and her husband, asking for a meeting. Not in court, just a conversation. They want to understand, she said. I told her no. There was nothing left to explain. But their panic grew. The texts started arriving at the new number. Somehow found or guessed. Messages from unknown numbers with familiar voices behind the words. You didn't have to do this. We were trying to make things easier. You could have just talked to us. Each one dripped with a kind of selective memory, as if I'd never sat at that table night after night, waiting for a sliver of inclusion. Yes. As if I hadn't already tried to belong. As if I hadn't been erased first. I forwarded them to my lawyer. She reminded them, again, that contact was not welcome. Then came the call from the school. They'd listed me as an emergency contact for my grandson. Still had me down as the one to call if no one else picked up. The secretary kindly asked if I still wanted to remain on the list. I asked her to remove me. It hurt, but I did it anyway. I wasn't a backup plan anymore. Not for anyone. Word spread, as it always does. I saw another post, this time more desperate. Something about abandonment. About how hard it is when family doesn't show up. About lessons and grace and God's timing. I didn't comment. I didn't even screenshot that one. Instead, made myself tea and sat on the edge of the narrow bed and wrote in my notebook. They are not grieving me. They are grieving their control. They miss what I gave, not who I was. They want the comfort of me. Without the presence of me. I underlined that last one. Twice I kept watching from afar, not obsessively, just enough to confirm what I already knew. That they didn't understand the difference between inheritance and entitlement. They thought they'd earned the house because they stayed in it, because they filled it with their noise and their plans and their goals. They forgot it was built on the back of someone else's effort. Someone else's silence. Me. They thought I would vanish like a story they were done telling. But I had my own version, okay? And this time, I was the one writing it. They were unraveling. Their friends started asking harder questions. One person commented, "Isn't she the owner? Isn't that her name on the deed?" No response. Another asked, "Did you really get her signature?" Still silence. Eventually, the posts stopped. I imagine the silence is louder for them now. It must be strange losing someone who's still alive. Someone who just walked away, locked the door, and didn't bother looking back. That's the thing about peace. It doesn't come with closure for everyone. Sometimes it just comes with a final permanent quiet. It didn't happen all at once. Peace doesn't fall over you like a curtain. It arrives in pieces the way early sunlight touches the edge of a curtain. Or how your name sounds when no one is using it against you. After 2 weeks above the flower shop, Marla offered me something more permanent. A friend of hers was moving out of a small cottage at the edge of town, 1 bedroom, 1 bath, slanted roof, and a white gate that creaked when you opened it. She said I could see it if I wanted. No pressure. I said yes before I had a chance. To think of all the reasons I shouldn't. The place was small, but it had a lemon tree out back and a worn stone bench beside it. Inside, the floors creaked like honest floorboards do, and the kitchen window looked out onto nothing but grass and an old bird feeder that leaned slightly to the right. I stood in the center of it all and listened. It was the first time in years. A house didn't feel like it was waiting for someone else's voice. I moved in slowly. My things didn't take up much space. It's a single suitcase, the black folder, a chipped mug that had somehow survived all the way from 1991, and the quilt I had carried from room to room. I bought a new set of plates, just 2, blue and white. Not because I was expecting anyone, but because it felt good to choose something just for me. The day after I moved in, I planted rosemary beside the front step. I liked the way it smelled when brushed. It reminded me of dinners I used to make. The ones where someone always asked, "What's that smell?" and I'd smile without answering. I walked to the market every other morning, picked out fruit that wasn't bruised and vegetables with dirt still clinging to their roots. The man behind the counter started calling me ma'am, with a softness that didn't feel like condescension. One morning he asked if I'd like to try the honey his wife made. I bought a small jar and used it sparingly, as if sweetness had to be rationed. The town was quieter than the one I left. Not by much. At the post office, I got a box in my new name. It didn't feel like hiding. It felt like choosing. People called me miss or ma'am or neighbor. No one called me mom. No one asked for anything but the time or the weather or whether the lemons in my yard were ripe yet. I started keeping a calendar. Not to track other people's lives, but my own. I marked the days I felt strong. Circled. The first day, I laughed. Really laughed. When the neighbor's dog chased a squirrel into the rosemary and came out covered in petals and dirt. Her name was June, the neighbor, not the dog. June lived 3 doors down and brought me jam on a Wednesday without a reason. She said it was because I looked like someone who understood silence. I told her I did. Sometimes she sat with me on the bench beneath the lemon tree. We didn't talk much, just enough to keep the quiet company. She told me she had 3 children and didn't speak to 2 of them anymore. I didn't ask why. She didn't ask me either. It was nice being known without being questioned. I took up baking again. Nothing fancy. Just simple things. Banana. Bread, oatmeal cookies, 1-pan lemon bars that cracked just slightly at the edges. I brought them to Marla once a week. She called me a magician and insisted I teach her how to get the tops golden without burning the bottoms. There was a rhythm to it. The mornings, the baking, the walking, the quiet. A life that didn't ask for explanations. I didn't check their pages anymore, didn't scroll through old photos or reread messages. I let them sit in the silence they'd tried to leave me in, and still. Sometimes I thought of my grandson, of the way he used to say my name when he had a nightmare, of how his fingers once curled around mine like he was still deciding whether the world was safe. But I didn't reach out. He'd grow, he'd learn, or he wouldn't. That part wasn't mine to shape anymore. One morning, as I was sweeping the steps, June brought over a bundle wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a photo frame, simple wood, no picture in it, just the frame. She said you should fill it with something that matters now. I thought about what that could be. A leaf, maybe one. That turned gold in my yard. A recipe card in my own handwriting. A clipping of the deed in my name, stamped and sealed. In the end, I framed a list I had written months ago in the motel, the one that said who I was and what I'd kept. I hung it near the window where the morning light made it hard to read, but easy to remember. I wasn't rebuilding a life. I was making one for the first time without asking anyone to approve it. There were no apologies coming. I didn't expect them. I didn't need them. They hadn't reached out again. Not with real words. Just the occasional ping to my lawyer, which she quietly redirected unanswered. They knew where I stood. I wasn't angry anymore. Not like before. I just didn't want to live in a house where my name was whispered like an inconvenience. Now, in this quiet place, I was loud in my own way. I cooked with garlic. I sang while I swept. I wore a red scarf when I went to town and didn't care if it clashed with my coat. I had peace. Not the kind you beg for, the kind you build. The letter came in early spring. It was folded into thirds, slid through the metal. Slot of my postbox, not marked urgent or personal, just my new name, written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. The envelope was pale yellow, my daughter's favorite color when she was young. She used to call it Butterlight, said it made everything feel warmer. I held it for a while before opening it, sat on the bench beneath the lemon tree, the air still cold at the edges. I traced her handwriting with my finger. It had changed. It's tighter, more upright, like she was trying too hard to be understood when I opened it. I half expected it to be angry, defensive, but it wasn't. She wrote that she didn't know where to begin, that everything felt too heavy to carry alone now, that she hadn't realized what was happening. Not really, not until it was too late, that she didn't know what he'd said, what he'd pushed, only that it all got done in her name and she hadn't stopped it. She said she missed me, not in the way people say it when they want something, but in the way people say it when they've already lost. She asked if I would meet her. 1 hour. At the park near the church where she used to sing in the children's choir. Said she'd be there whether I came or not. She signed it, Love Always. And her name looked foreign at the bottom. I folded the letter and tucked it into my sweater pocket. Didn't answer. Didn't call. But 3 days later, I went. The bench was still there, though the paint had faded. The playground was smaller than I remembered. The trees were bare, their shadows stretching thin across the grass. I sat down without looking for her. She arrived a few minutes later. Hair pulled back too tight, a coat too thin for the weather. Looked like a version of herself I'd known once, before time and fear started wearing her down. She sat at the far end of the bench, as if she wasn't sure she had permission. She said, "Thank you for coming." I didn't say anything right away. She looked down at her hands. He left. She said, a few weeks after the locks changed. Said he couldn't live with a woman who'd let her mother win. I let the words hang there. She was always good at trying to make losses sound like choices. She said she'd tried to fix things, but there were things that couldn't be fixed. Money, the story they'd told people, the lies that had grown legs and wandered out of control. She said she'd thought I was fine, that I'd always land on my feet. That's what I was to her, a net. A net you don't see until you fall. A net you resent for being there. She said she was sorry. Not dramatic, not performative. Just soft. Her voice barely above the wind. I believed that part. But I didn't forgive her, not because I didn't want to, but because forgiveness wasn't something I could hand out like candy anymore. It had to come from a place that hadn't been hollowed out. She asked if I'd ever come back, Visit the house. I shook my head. She looked down again. He told me you were just tired, she said. That it would be better for you. Easier. And you believed him. She nodded. I wanted to ask when she stopped believing me. When she stopped seeing me as someone worth trusting over a man who hadn't known her at 16? But I didn't ask. Instead, I said something that surprised even me. I hope you find peace, I told her. But not through me. She cried then, quietly. The kind of crying that folds inward. That doesn't need witnesses. She asked if she could hug me. I said no, not yet. She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe she'd finally begun to feel the weight of what had happened. We sat a while longer. Just the sound of wind through trees and a distant bell from the church tower. She asked if I was happy. I said I was becoming. And that had to be enough. She left before I did. Walked away slowly. Turned back once like she thought I might wave. I didn't. When I got home, I made tea and lit the candle June had given me for New Year's. I pulled the letter from my pocket and unfolded it again. Read it all the way through one more time. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't answer. That was the last time we saw each other. Once or twice after that, she sent a holiday card. Signed from her and my grandson, though I doubt he even remembered what I looked like. No return address, no handwritten note. Just a card with a snowy cottage and glitter that rubbed off on my fingers. I placed them in the back of a drawer. It wasn't that I didn't care, it was that I cared without obligation now. She had made her choice. I had made mine. Some bridges don't need to burn. You just need to be walked away from, firmly, fully, without turning back. Spring came late that year. The lemon tree in my yard bloomed all at once. Soft white blossoms with a scent like something between. Clean sheets and old memory. I sat beneath it most mornings, notebook in hand. A cup of tea balanced on the arm of the bench. The days passed without fanfare. No emergencies. No appointments written in someone else's handwriting. Just the rhythm of things I chose. It's a clink of a spoon against ceramic. The hum of bees. My breath, steady. It's my own. I stopped counting how long it had been since the house. Since the motel. Since I'd last heard her voice. Time doesn't pass in weeks anymore. It passes in small victories, like the day I baked bread without checking the recipe. Or the morning I forgot to feel afraid of being alone. Or when the mail came and there wasn't a single letter that made my hands shake. I still keep the deed, still framed, tucked in the back of the closet. Not because I plan to go back, but because it reminds me that I didn't vanish. That I was there. That I mattered, that the house was mine, and they knew it even if they couldn't say it out loud. Sometimes I think about the quiet cruelty of what they did, how it wasn't a moment, but a series of choices, all of them small, all of them deliberate, and how I made my own choice in return to walk away, not collapse. To take back. Not beg. To disappear on my own terms. I see women like me sometimes at the pharmacy. At the market, sitting by themselves on benches that face nothing in particular. They have that same stillness. Like they've been erased, but not fully. Like they're waiting to be recognized, but only by themselves. I want to reach out to them. But I don't. Not directly, instead. I leave things a note in the free library box behind the post office that says, "You are not difficult." They were. Just unkind. A card slipped into a grocery cart. "You are not invisible. I see you. I don't sign them. They're not for thanks. They're for the women who need to hear something true in a world that stopped listening." 1. Afternoon in late April. I burned a letter. Not hers. Not his. Mine. A letter I'd written to the woman I used to be. The one who folded towels with shaking hands while listening to betrayal behind closed doors. The one who checked on everyone else and waited for someone to ask how she was doing. I burned it slowly. In a tin dish in the yard. Watched the smoke curl into the air, carrying everything I didn't need to carry anymore. I whispered thank you to the ashes then. I swept them into the soil beneath the lemon tree. Life didn't hand me peace. I claimed it. I stitched it together. From paper trails and motel nights and the absence of apology, I learned that boundaries can look like locked doors. That survival can smell like rosemary and clean sheets. That dignity isn't something anyone gives you. It's something you refuse to let go of. Marla stopped by that evening with lilacs from her garden. She didn't stay long. Just left the flowers and said the sky looked like it might hold rain. I told her I didn't mind. Rain felt good now. Didn't feel like drowning. June waved from across the street while I brought the vase inside. She called out, "Love your hat." I called back, "Love yours more." We smiled without finishing the thought. These were my people now, not bound by blood, not held together by duty or guilt, just kindness, chosen and returned. I keep the notebook near the door. Sometimes I add to it a recipe, a word I want to remember, something my hands have done well. It isn't a journal. It's more like a record of presence, of proof that I was here, that I am still becoming. They haven't reached out again, not in ways that matter. A message on a birthday, tagged photo I didn't see. A question passed through someone else's voice. Do you ever think she'll come back? I won't. Not because I'm angry. Not because I need them to hurt, but because I've learned the difference between love and longing, between silence and peace. And I choose peace every time. I choose the sound of bees in rosemary, the weight of a warm mug in the early hours, the lemon blossoms falling onto my lap like tiny blessings. I choose mornings without apology, evenings without resentment. I choose the woman I've become, the one who took back the title and never looked over her shoulder. The house is still there. I check the property records once a year, like brushing past an old scar just to make sure it's still closed. It belongs to someone else now, a new family. It's a different story. I'm not bitter. I didn't want it back to live in. I wanted it back to prove that I could. The last thing I did before I left town for good was return to the porch. Just once, I didn't go inside. Just touched the doorframe. Whispered goodbye to the girl who used to answer everyone's needs before her own. Then left a small envelope under the mat. Inside was a copy of the title transfer and a note. Not for them, for me. It said, "This time, I decide who gets to call me anything else."